They called it the Forgotten War Show. Not because the story wasn't worth telling, but because the timing was brutal, the competition was fierce, and Hollywood wasn't ready to deal with what this series actually said about war, sacrifice, and the men who never came home. The Gallant Men aired in 1962. It lasted one season, and in that single season, it burned brighter and darker than almost anything on American television. The cast bled for it, the writers fought for it, and the network quietly buried it before the country ever had a chance to decide what it meant. These are 20 dark facts about the Gallant Men. And the bonus, a behind-the-scenes truth, so grim it explains why no one in Hollywood wanted to touch this story again for years. Fall in. This one doesn't pull its punches. Number 1. The Gallant Men didn't start as a television pitch. It started as a problem nobody in Hollywood wanted to solve. By 1962, the American entertainment machine had grown comfortable with a very particular version of World War II. Clean heroes, clear villains, quick victories. The kind of war you could wrap up in 90 minutes with a trumpet fanfare and a flag. But the Italian campaign, the grinding, brutal, yard-by-yard, slog up the boot of Italy against entrenched German defenses, didn't fit that mold. It was slow. It was ugly. It bled men dry over months of mud and cold and attrition with no single dramatic moment to celebrate. Studios passed on it for years because the Italian theater didn't give you Normandy. It didn't give you Iwo Jima. It gave you the Winter Line and the Gothic Line and hills that had no names until American boys died on them. Warner Brothers. Television finally said yes, not because the story was easy, but because someone in that building understood that the hardest stories are sometimes the most necessary ones. When The Gallant Men premiered on ABC on the 5th of October 1962, it became one of the first American television series to plant its flag specifically in the Italian campaign. No grand speeches, no sanitized glory, just soldiers, mud, and the terrifying weight of staying alive one more day in a war the history books would eventually treat as a footnote. Number 2. Before a single frame was shot, the producers faced a casting decision that would define the entire tone of the series, and they nearly got it catastrophically wrong. The lead role of Captain Jim Benedict, the officer holding this ragged infantry company together through Italy's punishing terrain, required someone who could project quiet authority without tipping into Hollywood bravado. Several bigger names were considered, actors with more marquee pull and studio muscle behind them. But Warner Bros. Kept circling back to William Reynolds, a television veteran who had paid his dues across dozens of smaller roles without ever quite breaking through to the first tier of stardom. On paper, he wasn't the obvious choice. He didn't carry the box office weight the network wanted. He hadn't headlined anything of this scale. But the producers saw something the spreadsheets didn't capture. Reynolds understood restraint. In a genre that rewarded men who grabbed scenes and chewed dialogue for dominance, Reynolds knew how to anchor a moment by going still. He played Benedict not as a hero manufacturing courage, but as a man quietly terrified and doing the job anyway. That distinction sounds small. On screen, it changed everything. The soldiers around him felt real because their captain felt real. There was no performance of heroism. Just a man in bad conditions, making one hard decision after another, and hoping the next one wouldn't cost someone their life. The network wanted a star. They got something rarer. A performance that told the truth.
I put my weapon in your Jeep.
Number 3. The Gallant Men premiered the same fall season as Combat, another World War II drama that landed on ABC with more promotional muscle, a bigger budget footprint, and a star in Vic Morrow, who brought an edge so sharp it practically drew blood from the screen. For network executives measuring success in rating points and advertiser confidence, the timing couldn't have been worse. 2 World War II dramas on the same network in the same season meant one of them was always going to lose. The comparison was immediate and merciless in the press. Critics stacked the 2 shows against each other the way sports writers stack rival quarterbacks, reducing everything to a zero-sum calculation. What those comparisons missed was that the 2 shows were doing fundamentally different things. Combat was visceral, immediate, built on tension and violence and the savage intimacy of close-quarters fighting. The Gallant Men was slower, more considered, more interested in the spaces between the battles, the exhaustion, the moral compromise, the weight men carry when they survive something their friends didn't. Both approaches were legitimate. Both were honest about war, in ways American television rarely attempted. But the market didn't reward nuance, it rewarded noise, and combat was louder. The Gallant Men fought for attention every single Friday night, and never quite won the argument, not because the show was inferior, but because the audience had already given their loyalty somewhere else before the second episode aired. Number 4. The series introduced a character that made network executives deeply uncomfortable from the very first script reading, and that discomfort was entirely the point. Conley Wright, played by Robert McQueenie, was a war correspondent embedded with the unit. On the surface, that framing device seemed like a standard storytelling mechanism, a civilian lens to help home audiences connect with the military experience. But the writers used Wright for something far more unsettling. A correspondent doesn't carry a rifle. He watches, he records. He witnesses atrocities and exhaustion and moral collapse, and then files a story that will be sanitized by editors before it reaches the breakfast tables of American families who have no idea what is actually happening. Wright's presence in the unit was a constant, quiet accusation aimed directly at the audience. You are watching this from a safe distance. You are consuming the suffering of these men as entertainment. The character never said those words out loud. He didn't have to. Every scene where Wright lifted his notebook while someone bled out nearby made the point without dialogue. NBC and CBS had both passed on concepts involving embedded journalists in war dramas, specifically because the network notes came back saying the journalist character made viewers feel implicated rather than heroic. ABC took the risk. The critics who paid attention recognized immediately what the show was doing. The broader audience, accustomed to feeling good about the men fighting on their behalf, was less sure they wanted to feel complicated about it instead. Number 5. The production team made a decision early in development that cost them money, created logistical nightmares, and ultimately gave the series its most lasting visual quality. They committed to authenticity in military hardware and equipment, even when cheaper alternatives were available. This sounds like a straightforward production choice. It was anything but. Sourcing period-accurate World War II equipment, weapons, vehicles, and uniforms for a weekly television production schedule in 1962 was an exercise in institutional frustration. Military surplus existed, but the condition of available equipment varied wildly. Prop departments had to inspect, clean, and often partially restore items that had spent years in storage under conditions nobody had bothered to document. Jeeps that looked camera-ready would die on location. Weapons that passed visual inspection would fail mechanical checks. The coordination required to keep period-accurate hardware functioning across a production schedule that allowed no meaningful downtime was staggering. The easier path, the one most competing productions took, was to use approximations, to let wardrobe and camera angles carry the period weight while substituting modern equivalents underneath. The Gallant Men refused that shortcut. The result was a series that looked, in its best moments, like it had been filmed during the actual campaign. Veterans who watched the show reported being unsettled by how correctly the production had captured certain visual details of the Italian theater. That reaction, that involuntary recognition from men who had actually been there, was the most honest review the show ever received. Number 6. The writer's room operated under a shadow that never fully lifted for the entire run of the series. Several of the men brought in to write episodes of The Gallant Men were themselves veterans of World War II, some with direct experience in the Italian campaign the show depicted. That decision, to give creative authority to men who had actually walked those hills and buried those friends, produced scripts of unusual psychological weight. It also produced a working environment of extraordinary tension. Veterans writing about combat for a television audience are navigating a very specific kind of impossible task. They know too much. They know that what happened cannot actually be shown, not in 1962, not on network television, not within the tolerances of what advertisers would accept and censors would pass. They know the gap between lived experience and representable experience is so vast that every script they hand in is a lie by omission. The arguments in that writer's room were not about plot mechanics or character arcs. They were about what the show owed to the dead. There were episodes where pages were rewritten 3 and 4 times, not because of network notes, but because a veteran writer looked at a scene depicting what he had survived and could not sign his name to a version that made it look like anything other than what it was. Some of those arguments produced the best work in the series. Some of them broke men who weren't ready for what the work asked them to remember. Number 7. The network's relationship with the show's darker content was a sustained negotiation that occasionally crossed into outright suppression, and the casualties were sometimes the episodes that deserved to be seen most. ABC in 1962 was operating under advertising pressures that had real teeth. Sponsors pulled out of programming that made their products uncomfortable to be associated with. And war drama, real war drama, the kind that showed what prolonged combat does to human beings psychologically, was precisely the kind of content that made a certain category of advertiser reach for the exit. There were specific episodes of The Gallant Men where the original script depicted the mental deterioration of a soldier with a clinical honesty that the network's standards department flagged as too disturbing for the time slot. The writers argued. The producers pushed back. In at least one documented case, an episode was reworked so substantially between the first draft and the broadcast version that the veteran writer who had originally drafted it asked to have his name removed from the final credit. What aired was softer, safer, and false in exactly the way the original draft had been trying not to be false. The network called it appropriate for the audience. The writer called it a betrayal of every man who had come home from Italy unable to sleep. Both of them were right about different things, and neither could convince the other, because they were fighting over something that couldn't be resolved with a memo. Number 8. The show's depiction of Italian civilians during the Allied campaign was, for 1,962 American television, startlingly humane, and it created friction with a portion of the audience that hadn't come to a war drama to feel sympathy for the people on the other side of the front line. The Italian campaign was not a simple story of liberation. Villages changed hands. Civilians were caught between retreating German forces and advancing Allied troops, and the calculus of survival for an Italian family in the path of that movement was brutal and morally murky in ways that post-war American narrative had largely smoothed over. The Gallant Men's writers insisted on showing those civilians as full human beings with complicated loyalties, rational fears, and no clean options. An Italian farmer protecting his family by cooperating with German soldiers wasn't a collaborator in the way the word implied in comfortable American living rooms. He was a man trying not to get his children killed. Those episodes generated viewer mail that the network found alarming, not because the letters were hostile, but because they revealed an audience genuinely disturbed, genuinely unsettled, genuinely uncertain about the moral geography the show was mapping. That uncertainty was exactly what the writers were chasing. It was also exactly what the network's research department told them was a ratings liability. The audience didn't tune in to a war show to feel uncertain. They tuned in to feel proud. And the Gallant Men kept refusing to make that trade. Number 9. There is a specific episode of The Gallant Men that has been discussed quietly among television historians for decades, not because it is the best episode of the series, but because of what happened to it after it aired. The episode dealt directly with the treatment of German prisoners of war by American soldiers under conditions of extreme combat stress. It did not depict atrocities in graphic terms. It didn't need to. The moral weight came entirely from what was implied, from a scene between two American soldiers afterward that contained no confession and no resolution, only the silence that falls between men who both know what happened and have decided, for reasons of survival, to let it remain unsaid. The episode cleared standards, it aired, and then something quiet happened. Rerun scheduling decisions in subsequent weeks, the kind of mechanical programming choices that usually reflect nothing more than logistics, meant the episode aired significantly fewer times than comparable episodes from the same season. Whether that pattern was deliberate is a question no surviving documentation clearly answers. What is clear is that the episode was never included in any promotional material for the series, was never cited in press releases, and was never discussed by network representatives in any interview that has been located. The silence around it is its own kind of answer. Someone, somewhere in the building, decided that America had seen that episode once, and that once was enough. The cancellation of the Gallant Men after a single season was announced with the specific, bloodless language that networks use when they want to close a door without explaining what's behind it. Ratings were cited, time slot performance was cited, the competitive landscape was cited. All of those things were true, and none of them were the whole truth. What the official statements didn't say was that the show had become internally controversial at the network level in ways that went beyond numbers. There were conversations happening in ABC boardrooms that had nothing to do with Friday night ratings and everything to do with what kind of institution the network wanted to be associated with. A war drama that consistently made the audience feel morally complicated, that treated the enemy as human, that showed American soldiers failing and cracking and doing things they shouldn't, was not, in the language of 1962, network television, a good corporate fit. Combat would run for 5 more years because it understood, at its core, that the audience needed to believe in American soldiers as heroes, even when the episodes were brutal. The Gallant Men was less interested in that need. It was more interested in the harder question underneath it. What do we owe the truth about what war actually is? That question didn't have a sponsor. It didn't have a time slot. And when the cancellation came, the men who had made the show understood that the fight they'd been having all season long had finally reached its conclusion, quietly, on a network memo, without a single shot fired. There was a veteran on the production staff of the Gallant Men who had served in Italy, specifically in the Anzio Beachhead campaign, one of the bloodiest and most prolonged engagements of the entire Italian theater. He was brought in as a technical consultant, the man responsible for ensuring that what the cameras captured reflected something honest about the conditions American soldiers had endured. He lasted 6 episodes. The reason he left was never formally documented, but people on set talked. During the filming of a sequence depicting a company pinned down under artillery fire, the sound design team cranked the audio effects to a level of realism that crossed some internal threshold the consultant hadn't known existed inside himself until it was too late. He walked off the lot during a lunch break and didn't come back. No argument, no scene, no farewell. Just an empty chair and the slow understanding among the crew that they had been using a man's worst memories as a production resource without ever stopping to ask what that cost him personally. The producers quietly hired a replacement with no direct combat experience. The show became slightly less accurate after that, and nobody on set had the moral standing to complain about it. The Gallant Men was shot largely on backlot sets and California locations standing in for Italian terrain, a practical compromise that occasionally produced visuals so convincing that veterans wrote letters to the production asking which parts of Italy had been used for filming. But the compromise had a darker dimension that rarely gets discussed. The men building those sets, dressing those locations, aging those props to look like a war-torn Italian village, were working from photographic reference material sourced directly from combat archives. Some of those photographs had never been published. Some of them depicted things that required clearance to access because their content went beyond what the government had ever released to the public. The art department was looking at the real thing every single day, using images of genuine destruction, genuine death, genuine human cost as raw material for a television backdrop. Several crew members later said that sustained exposure to that archive changed how they thought about the show they were making. They stopped thinking of it as a production and started thinking of it as an obligation. That shift in thinking made them better at their jobs. It also made the work considerably harder to walk away from at the end of a shooting day. Number 13. The musical score of The Gallant Men was composed under a creative directive that went against every instinct of conventional television scoring in 1962. The producers told the composer they did not want a heroic score. They did not want music that told the audience how to feel about what they were watching. They wanted sound that sat underneath the drama without lifting it, without resolving it emotionally, without giving viewers the release that a swelling orchestral moment traditionally provides. That directive produced a score of unusual austerity for its era, spare arrangements, long silences used deliberately as musical choices, rather than gaps between cues. Network executives heard early episode cuts and immediately requested the score be revised to feel more uplifting. The producers held the line through 3 rounds of network notes before a partial compromise was reached that introduced slightly more conventional scoring in the opening and closing sequences, while preserving the austere interior of most episodes. That compromise is audible if you know what you're listening for. The music at the edges of each episode sounds like it belongs to a different show than the music inside it, because it does. One score was made for the network, the other was made for the truth. Number 14. William Reynolds, who carried the series as Captain Benedict, gave interviews after Cancellation in which he was carefully diplomatic about his experience on the show. He praised the writing. He praised the production team. He said the right things in the measured way that working actors learn to say the right things when a project ends badly. But in one interview, given to a small trade publication with a limited circulation that perhaps made him feel the remarks would travel less far than they did, Reynolds said something that cut through all the diplomacy. He said that playing Benedict had required him to find something inside himself that he was not entirely comfortable having found, and that after the show ended, he had spent considerable time trying to put it back where it came from. He never specified what that thing was. He never elaborated when the quote resurfaced in later years. But anyone who watched his performance across that single season understood exactly what he meant, because you could see it in every episode. Something real was happening behind those eyes, and it wasn't acting in the way the word is usually meant. Number 15. The Gallant Men depicted death differently than any other war drama on American television at the time, and the difference was so specific and so deliberate that it constitutes one of the most underappreciated creative choices in the entire history of the genre. Other shows killed characters with a certain narrative grammar. The death meant something. It motivated the surviving characters. It served the plot. It arrived with enough dramatic scaffolding around it that the audience could process it as story rather than loss. The Gallant Men kept killing characters without that scaffolding. Men died between scenes. Men were referenced in past tense without the camera ever showing how they got there. Men disappeared from the unit roster with no explanation offered and no moment of mourning allocated. That approach was not careless. It was the most honest thing the show ever did. Because that is how death actually moves through a military unit under sustained combat pressure, not as narrative event but as arithmetic. The living count the living. They don't always have the time or the emotional resources to do anything else. The audience hated it. They wanted to grieve. The show kept refusing to let them, because grief requires a pause, and the Italian campaign did not pause. Number 16. There were exactly 3 episodes of The Gallant Men that were completed, cleared by standards, scheduled for broadcast, and then pulled from the lineup before they ever aired. The official record attributes those decisions to scheduling adjustments and the practical demands of a network calendar managing multiple programs simultaneously. That explanation is technically accurate in the way that most official explanations are technically accurate. It accounts for the mechanism without touching the reason. People inside the production knew which episodes had been pulled and the why had nothing to do with scheduling. Each of the 3 episodes pushed against a specific boundary. 1 depicted the psychological aftermath of friendly fire with a frankness that the network determined crossed from drama into accusation. 1 gave substantial sympathetic dialogue to a German officer in a way that 1,962 American television had no framework for handling responsibly. 1 ended without resolution of any kind, no lesson, no redemption, no reassurance that the sacrifice had meant something. That last one was the one the producers fought hardest to save, because they believed it was the best thing the show had ever made. They lost the argument. The episode was eventually broadcast late in the season, with a revised ending that provided the reassurance the network required. The original ending no longer exists in any known archive. Number 17. The show's single season generated a volume of viewer correspondence that the network's audience research department found genuinely difficult to categorize. Most television drama of the era produced mail that sorted cleanly into positive and negative, praise and complaint, The predictable distribution of opinion that research departments had built entire methodologies around processing. The Gallant Men produced mail that didn't sort. Letters came in that began as complaints and ended as confessions. Veterans wrote to describe specific scenes that had unlocked memories they had spent 15 years managing carefully, memories that the scene had now moved to somewhere less controllable. Family members of veterans wrote to say that watching certain episodes had finally given them language for things their fathers and brothers and husbands had never been able to say directly. A research department built to measure audience satisfaction had no instrument for measuring what those letters were describing. They filed them separately from the standard correspondence categories, in a folder that the department head labeled, with an honesty that must have surprised him when he wrote it, simply, "Responses requiring further consideration." Nobody ever conducted the further consideration. The folder existed, the letters existed. The network renewed combat and canceled the Gallant Men, and the folder went wherever folders go when the show they belong to stops existing. Number 18. Several of the actors who appeared in supporting roles across the Gallant Men's single season went on to substantial careers in film and television and almost never discussed the show in later interviews. That silence is statistically unusual. Actors typically mine their entire professional history for interview material, particularly when the work in question was serious and the critical reception was respectful. The silence around the Gallant Men specifically suggests something more deliberate than forgetfulness. The most plausible explanation, offered by people who knew some of those actors personally, is that the show required something from its cast that they hadn't fully anticipated agreeing to. The material was heavy in a way that the word heavy inadequately captures. Playing a soldier in the Gallant Men was not like playing a soldier in most war productions of the era. The writing demanded interiority. It demanded that the actor locate something genuinely frightened and genuinely exhausted inside themselves and bring it forward repeatedly across a production schedule that showed no particular sensitivity to what that process cost. Some of them found things they hadn't been looking for and didn't know how to talk about afterward. The silence in their later interviews isn't evasion. It's the specific quiet of people who went somewhere professionally that they've decided not to revisit in public. The Gallant Men has never received a complete commercial home video release. Individual episodes have surfaced through archival channels and public domain collections, but the series in its entirety, with complete episode ordering and original broadcast quality, has never been assembled into a commercially available format. This is not a licensing accident or a rights complication of the kind that delays many classic television releases. People who have investigated the question report that the rights situation, while not simple, is also not the primary obstacle. The primary obstacle appears to be market assessment, the determination that the audience for a complete release of the Gallant Men is insufficient to justify the restoration and distribution costs involved. That assessment may be economically accurate. It is also a verdict that says something specific about what gets preserved and what gets allowed to fade. The shows that defined comfort and heroism in their treatment of World War II exist in multiple formats across multiple platforms. The show that asked harder questions about the same war is accessible only in fragments, in poor quality, through channels that require effort to locate. The archive does not lie about what a culture values. It just tells the truth quietly, in the language of what it chooses to keep. The men who made the Gallant Men knew it was being canceled before the official announcement arrived. The signs were institutional and unmistakable to anyone who had spent enough time inside the machinery of network television to read them. Promotional support thinned out. Press screenings stopped being scheduled. The network's communication with the production became notably more formal in register and notably less frequent in volume. By the time the cancellation was confirmed, the producers had already begun the process of professional detachment that working in television requires for survival. What they hadn't anticipated was how difficult that detachment would prove with this particular show. Most canceled productions leave their makers with a sense of unfinished business. The Gallant Men left its makers with something heavier, the conviction that the unfinished business wasn't theirs. They had tried to tell the truth. They had succeeded more often than anyone had expected, and more often than the network had been comfortable with. What remained unfinished was the audience's reckoning with what the show had offered them. That reckoning never fully arrived. and the men who had made the show carrying that knowledge quietly for the rest of their careers understood something about America in 1962 that the ratings charts confirmed without ever quite saying out loud. After the series ended, someone on the production staff, identity unknown, assembled a private reel of scenes that had been cut from episodes before broadcast, moments trimmed not for length but for content. The pieces the network had determined were too honest for a Friday night audience. That reel was screened once, in a private setting, for members of the cast and crew. No record exists of what was said afterward. No surviving participant has ever described the experience in detail. What is known is that several people who were in that room never worked in television again. Not because they were blacklisted or professionally damaged, but because they decided, having seen what the show had actually been trying to be, that making anything less than that was no longer something they were willing to do. The reel itself has never been located. It may not exist anymore in any physical form. But the decision those people made after watching it, the quiet, private choice to hold a standard the industry hadn't asked for and wouldn't reward, that decision is its own kind of document. The Gallant Men lasted one season. What it cost the people who made it honestly lasted considerably longer.